Hello and welcome back to AP World History Modern. Today we're going to be on our second day on Unit 7.1, Shifting Power After 1900. Today we're going to be focusing in on Russia. So we're going to be looking at how the internal and external factors contributed to a change in Russia after 1900. In the previous video we did the Ottoman Empire to Turkey. All right, so specifically, we're going to be looking at the Russian Revolution. And just as a kind of a way to start things real quick, I like kind of just looking at this image. And just it's always good to recognize who the people are that we're going to be learning about, and can you recognize and can you figure them out. All right, so you also never know when you're going to have to write an SAQ where you are going to be given a person's image, right? So it's always good to at least kind of have an idea of what people look like. So try to figure them out, and I'm going to go over who they are right now with you, right? So this is Castro, and he's from Cuba, right? So the Cuban Revolution of 1959. So this is Stalin, right? Joseph Stalin, which we'll be talking about in this unit. Probably remember Karl Marx, right? And this is the one that usually trips people up. But he is the socialist leader that was in your homework last night. So Vladimir Ilyanovich, V.I. Lenin, right? So Lenin, Lenin, right? So Russia, and of course, this is Mao, right? Mao Zedong of China. All right, so we're talking today about that transition from the Russian Empire to the Soviet Union. All right, so that transition from the Russian Empire to the Soviet Union. And, oh, what happened to my, I don't want to do that. Something happened. Huh. All right, my ImageMate is acting funny. Let me close this down. I was going to start doing some shared notes with you like I did last time. And, but let me, probably have to reboot that. I did, it was working. ImageMate. So I apologize for this pause. But I need to pull that up. There it is. It's under Elmo. All right, so there we go. All right, working again. All right, so as far as our notes today, we are looking at that transition, that transition from the Russian Empire. Well, and I am apparently what happened here anyway? For some reason, when I make that bigger, it switches screens, and I think you lose sight of it. So I guess I'll just keep this here. All right, so the Russian Empire, and we're going to be transitioning this to the, eventually, the Soviet Union. And sometimes you'll see that referred to as the USSR. All right, so the Union of Soviet Socialist LIST Republics, REP. All right, so the USSR. So we're making that transition, right? And of course, this transition happens, right? So between 1917, and we start actually seeing the Soviet Union being used around 1921 or so, right? So this is kind of that transition period. But after 1922, 1922, it's definitely the Soviet Union by that point, right? So the Civil War is done and all that kind of stuff. All right, so what are we looking for here? We're looking for internal factors. Internal factors and external factors. Right, we're looking for the internal factors and the external factors that are gonna result in this. All right, so just kind of keeping in mind that contributed to the creation of the Soviet Union. So we're just running this the learning objective. All right, so to start off with, all right, we're looking at the Romanovs, right? So we're talking about ending the Russian Empire. So the Russian Empire goes back, or at least specifically the Romanovs themselves go back to Michael Romanov, right, and the establishment of this Romanov dynasty. And it's a pretty long line of succession going back to the 1600s. Of course, Catherine the Great is not a Romanov, but she was married to one for a short period of time. And of course, our last Romanov is Nicholas II, and today that's who we're going to be concerning ourselves with. You might be familiar with the Romanovs. There is a Netflix or a Prime series called The Romanovs. It's kind of looks at some of the people who are related to the Romanov dynasty. But most students know about her, but Anastasia, because of the Disney history, or the Disneyfied history version of events of what happens to her life. And I do assure you, history is not Disney packaged. So it's not quite as nice of a story. All right. But that's kind of, I need to get into the ins and outs of this. So, as far as as far as the Romanovs, though, he's our last Romanov, so we need to kind of look at what happens in his lifetime. All right, so as far as issues, I don't really categorize this per se as an internal factor. Like, I don't know how noteworthy this is, other than just pointing it out as an auspicious beginning to a rule. The fact that on your coronation day, 1,300 plus people die, it is not a good. Not a beginning, a good beginning to your coronation. The only kind of coronation day I can think of that might be worse than this would be with Elsa freezing out Arendelle. Not a good start to your rule. All right, but to kind of get into more serious things here, this is a kind of a good example of an internal factor. So pogroms, right? So from 1903, that's kind of number one under internals, pogroms, Pogroms, so a series of pogroms between 1903 through 06, and what we need to kind of make sure we understand is what it is, right? What it is, and what the effects of it are. All right, so let's zoom in a little bit on this and just kind of talk about this. All right, so this is, specifically what it is anti-Jewish violence. And technically, I think the word pogrom can apply to any ethnic group or violence against any ethnic group. However, when it comes to actual application of this word, I don't know if I can ever remember seeing it being used to mean anything other than anti-Jewish violence. I've seen the word used before in different places other than Russia, like the Polish pogroms, for example. But so anyway, so we have a series of pogroms. So what are the effects? Right? What are the effects of this? Why is this an internal factor that might weaken it? This is going to result in, an estimated 2 million, right? 2 million, Jewish people to immigrate, right? To immigrate out of Russia, right, to immigrate from Russia, right, and primarily to places like the UK or the USA, right? And of course, why does this matter? There are a number of times that we have talked about religious persecution resulting in immigrations of my religious minority groups in this class. We've talked about it in the case of Muslims and Jews from Spain as a result of the Spanish Inquisition. especially in the late 1400s and early 1500s. We talked about it in relation to the Huguenots. So the French Protestants, or the Huguenots, as a result of Louis XIV's Edict of Fontainebleau, right? So immigrating out. And so what do we often deal with is when we see migration as a result of religious persecution, we see wealth, right? Wealth and human capital, right? Wealth and human capital will leaving a society, right? And of course, maybe another way to put this is, right, sometimes you'll see this referred to as a brain drain, right? So human capital, this is a 6th grade vocab word, simply referred to the accumulated knowledge. So if you're, specifically for Russia, if you do not want to see, if you're trying to industrialize, you don't want to see wealth leaving your country, and you don't want to see people who are educated, leaving your countries, doctors, lawyers, scientists, engineers, right? This will slow down or hamper your industrial efforts, right? Your modernization efforts. I guess the next time in this class we'll probably talk about a brain drain. We'll talk about why the Berlin Wall was created, right? Was the Berlin Wall meant to keep people in or out, right? Obviously, it was meant to keep people in. People who have the financial means and the intelligence to leave. When persecution happens or civil liberties are being violated, they will leave, right? You'll see those migrations out of places. So this is a kind of a good one to start with, all right? So the pogroms, and you can see that idea, that general, that general perception being illustrated here as well. All right, so right, you see Roosevelt. Right, Roosevelt demanding a stop to the pogroms. All right. But you can obviously see what they're bringing with them as well. Okay. All right, next one. Bloody Sunday. Right, so Bloody Sunday, and this will be number 2 for our internal factors. So Bloody Sunday. Right, Bloody Sunday. So what is Bloody Sunday? This is it's a protest, right? So this is a protest. But what are they marching for? They're fighting for working conditions, right? Working conditions. They march upon the Winter Palace, and we see over 1,000 killed when the Tsar's soldiers, when the Russian soldiers open fire on them, and of course this is going to result in the Revolution of 1905. Right, so revolution of 1905. Okay, and the Revolution of 1905. So Bloody Sunday, the massacre that happens there. The outrage over this is going to spread, and it's going to result in a widespread revolt. The military will crush it pretty brutally, but you are going to see concessions made by Nicholas II with the boyars, right, with the nobility, in order to get their backing to bring an end to this. So, and of course, the primary effect of this is going to be the Duma, right? The establishment of the Duma, or parliament, right? That Russian parliament, right? So that's kind of our primary impact of this. And of course, when we talk about parliament, or the Duma that gets created, it's largely going to be an advisory body initially. But you can see it's kind of, I want to make a French comparison, it's kind of an interesting combination of the Estates General and the National Assembly. You do see, a lot of power tilted towards the nobility or the boyars, but you do see some representation by the different classes, right? So it's not all, it's not completely unequal, but it is pretty unequal, all right? You're also going to see a crackdown of dissidents or revolutionaries. So in 1905, we see, Lenin is given the boot, right? So he's not martyred, but he's exiled. So he'll go to Finland initially. Eventually, he'll settle in Switzerland, is where he eventually settles out. All right, next, and this will be a good example of our first external factor, is the Russo Japanese War. All right, so the Russo Japanese War, 1904. Peace treaty signed in 1905 in Portsmouth, New Hampshire. And of course, this is a humiliating defeat. And of course, one of the effects, or one of the major effects of this, is a real push towards militarization. A real push towards militarization. And so between 1905 and 1914, we're going to see a real focus on industrial militarization take place. So it's obviously not going to be enough to defeat the Germans in World War I, but it's also going to be, but it will be enough to prevent the Germans from running over them and at least hold the line to a degree. Russia will be a contender with them at this point. All right, Rasputin. Right, Rasputin. Rasputin, I generally put him on there as number 3 under your internal factors. All right, Rasputin. And then I generally cross him out. Rasputin, I generally do not like ever seeing him on a written response to a causes of the Russian Revolution, because for the most part, you're going to talk about, his, either his ability to heal, Alexei, the hemophilia connection, or you're going to talk about, his love interest, or you're going to talk about his apparently will to live, right? But, none of those are going to be actual causes. If you're going to try to use Rasputin as a way to kind of support how this is, connected to the Russian Revolution at all, or, that transition, it's like you almost have to make a Marie Antoinette case, Marie Antoinette often gets used as a way to delegitimize the French monarchy. Rasputin, you could make an argument along those lines, that when Tsar Nicholas II was gone, the Tsarina invited him into the house, into the Winter Palace, and, the events that take place as a result of him being connected to the Tsarina, discredit the idea of the Tsar, right? So that's probably the strongest case you're going to get. Your best bet is to just ignore him, right? That's always the safest bet, but he is mesmerizing. All right, moving on. All right, so into the real stuff. If you want to get into like the real effects of the primary cause, as opposed to a secondary cause of the Russian Revolution, nothing stands out as much as this one here, right? World War I, right? The Great War. So, right, let's kind of throw this in here. This becomes our number 2. All right, so the Great War, World War I. Right. So what happens here is the real issue that we kind of associate with World War I really isn't the fact that Russia doesn't do great. All kinds of people lose wars, and you don't see them being overthrown. But what happens is by 1915, Tsar, and you'll also see it spelled Tsar sometimes, Tsar Nicholas II goes to the front, right, and takes control. All right, so after some losses, the Tsar goes and actually takes the reins on the military effort. This is often referred to as kind of the greatest mistake that Nicholas II could have made. So the thing is if you have a general on the front who is losing, you as the leader can fire that general and put someone new into that position. However, if you fire the general who's making the decisions and then you put yourself into that position and start making the decisions, what happens when things don't turn around? Who is to blame? Who is to blame for the failures on the front? You can't blame anyone but yourself at that point, right? So this is one of those things where, had Nicholas II stayed in St. Petersburg, maybe that whole Rasputin thing would not have been such a big thing. He would have had someone else to blame for the war effort. And it's also during this time that we see the Duma, right? They will establish their own separate army. Right, so we see by late 1916, we actually see a second military established by the Duma. Not at the front per se, right? But you're starting to see things happen, right, amongst the Duma. Never a good sign, right? Never a good sign, right? And of course, insert March, right? So March of 1917. Right, so let's continue this up. So once again, just like 1905 or similar to 1905, we see a march on the Winter Palace. But unlike that previous time, the soldiers do not fire upon the marchers. They're hungry as well, right? So this starts off as a bread march, right? Or you can call it a riot. Right, so they're marching for bread, and this becomes known as the March, or sometimes you'll see it as the February Revolution. Okay, so you'll see both because Russia is Russia had never gone away from the Julian calendar. They never adopted the Gregorian calendar. So that's why you see these two dates. So February on the Julian calendar, March on the Gregorian calendar. All right, so we're going to see the March Revolution or February Revolution. So the Winter Palace is stormed at that point, and the Tsarina, the Romanov family is put under a house arrest. Nicholas II will eventually be brought in after a few days and put under a house arrest as well. And this is going to result in the establishment of the Provisional government, which is just the Duma. Right? So the Duma takes power at this point. And they were pretty well equipped to, so it takes a matter of about 3 days before things get under control. And what they don't do is they don't deal with any of the kind of underlying issues that kind of resulted in the turmoil to begin with, all right, or resulted in that march to begin with, right? So we're going to have a provisional government, right? The provisional government, right? So we see the establishment of the provisional government here, and of course, just kind of be aware what they don't, right? They do not. Right? They do not end the war. They don't deal with land issues. They do not deal with land issues, the food situation, and they do not get rid of the Bolsheviks. All right, so I guess this should become our number 5. Right, so our internal. Right, kind of internal issues continued. Right, so our internal issues continued is, so I guess that would put us at number 5. Right, our number 5 is Lenin arrives in April of 1917. And of course, he gives his very famous April Thesis, right? And he makes basically a campaign promise So the Lenin story, remember, he was exiled back in 1905. The German government kept track of radicals, right, throughout Europe. When the German government at this time hears about what's going on in Russia, the turmoil, the establishment of the provisional government, they go and they make Lenin a secret offer, right? So they put him on board his own train. And they just send him send them all the way to St. Petersburg. And then they supply him with money, right, so that he can agitate. From the German perspective, it's pretty intelligent. If you're at war with a country and you can, sow unrest in that country, then that's going to help you, right? So it made sense from the German perspective to do this. So Lenin will show up and give his April thesis, and of course that is. Right. The April thesis, it's very simple, and it's actually a long speech, but if you want to summarize it down to 3 words: peace, right, land, and bread. He promised to end World War I. He promised to redistribute land to the peasants and the working class, and promised to deal with the food issues. I'll post next to this video a little video clip that we watch in class. Let's see if I have that. Well, maybe I do not have that pulled up at all, so I can kind of just show you what I'm talking about, but yeah, apparently I don't. Well, maybe I do. Maybe it's right here. Oh, yeah. All right, so I'll post this on my page as well. It's just a little cartoon, but I assure you, after watching it, you'll never have a hard time remembering what the April thesis was about. Okay. All right. So Lenin shows up in April, and at this point, you have a viable alternative to. You don't really need to get in and know all the details of the difference between the Mensheviks and the Bolsheviks and the different radical groups. But the one that matters to us are the Bolsheviks, right? These are Lenin's people. All right. And, by the time we get to July, Lenin believes he has enough support to overthrow the provisional government, but he fails. But one of the things that comes out of that July uprising is that Trotsky now supports Lenin and works with Lenin. And with Trotsky's support, you do see a kind of critical mass with support, so that they're actually, they're viable by the time we get into, August, September. All right, so Lenin, if you're kind of interested in this, you're welcome to read, but I'm going to move on. Okay, and just kind of talk about a few things here. Right, so following the July uprising, the Bolsheviks, right, this is Lenin's group. Trotsky has joined them, and with more popular support, they're going to push and we're going to see what becomes known as the November Revolution or October Revolution on the Julian calendar, right? So if you've ever seen the old Cold War movie, The Hunt for Red October is referring to the October Revolution on the Julian calendar, or the November Revolution. Thankfully, we're going to switch over to the Gregorian calendar in the Soviet Union, so this will probably be the last time we have to do these double date things. All right, so all right, so the November Revolution happens, and really what we see here in this bloodless revolution is that the Bolsheviks make a demand for an election by the provisional government, and the provisional government concedes. All right, so the provisional government has an election, and we see here that the Bolsheviks actually lose that election. They do not win a majority in that election. However, Lenin, seeing that he was not going to have a majority, chalked that up to hundreds of years of upper class manipulation, and of course bourgeois capitalism was to blame for the Bolsheviks not winning the majority. So by December of 1917, we're seeing the formation of what becomes what is known as the Cheka. You might be more familiar with a later name, the KGB. Right, so the Cheka gets formed, and when in January of 1918, when the Duma, the provisional government, these 670 members, come to be seated, the Cheka will come and arrest those who are not Bolsheviks. So by the time we get to January of 1918, we can say that, the Russian Empire is over. The Tsar had been gone for, better part of 8 months by this point, but the provisional government is over. All right. So what we see here is now that we're in 1918, now that we're in 1918, you can start looking at the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk. All right. So we'll put this under our external. All right, we'll put this under our external, and I guess that would be number 3. All right, so because this is a major event, so the spring of 1918. Right, so by the spring of 1918, March or so of 1918, we see the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk. Okay, and we can see what is conceded here by Lenin. I mean, this is a massive land giveaway to the Germans. I mean, you can see where the front was, at the time, and he simply gives away massive amounts of land. Of course, there will be some repercussions for this, but from what I have read about Lenin's thought process behind this, he was looking to end the bleed, right? Stop the hemorrhaging of lives and resources, and the thought that Lenin had was that Europe was on the verge of a widespread socialist revolution, and that the war was going to give way to a socialist revolt, and then all these bourgeois treaties were going to be renegotiated, and this would all be given back. All right. So, however, notice that we are 6 months from the end of World War I. Right. So, had they stuck in stuck with the war effort, then obviously you could have prevented this land giveaway. But also, if they had stuck with it and established some legitimacy as a government with the Allies, this probably would have prevented the Russian Civil War. But they do not, right? So we do get that, we do see this massive land giveaway. All right, so I got a couple just basic difference between Leninism and Marxism. You're welcome to pause and read. All right, and I always kind of point this out. I feel like I have to point this out. Not that it's a bad thing, but our mascot here at the high school is the Red Terror, and it is always good to point out where our mascot name comes from. So, what is the Red Terror, right? So this is this is something that we see following an assassination attempt on Lenin, right? And it's a campaign of mass killing, torture, and oppression on all those who opposed the Bolsheviks. Right, so the Red Terror, kind of becomes synonymous with the Reds during the Russian Civil War. Total number of people killed in this kind of Red Terror, so somewhere around 100,000 to 500,000 or so. So anyway, so we are technically, our mascot is the Bolsheviks, that is what our mascot is. Now, I always have a couple of students who do not believe what I'm saying. So as you can see here, I am on our school website. And I'm going to go to where it says our crest, logo, and mascot. Right. And if you read that, let's just kind of make that a little bigger. Right. Our mascot is the Red Terrors, created in 1918 by Glen Academy student Cormac McGarvey. Chose the name based on the phrase to describe the political and violent campaigns of the Red Terror by the communist movement, potentially. Right, and of course, this is the reason, potentially the scariest concept to Americans at this time. So, like when our football team would roll into your town, what is scarier than the communists coming to your town to fight and destroy your school, right? So we are the Red Terrors. Anyway, so I always feel compelled to kind of talk about that real quick, just because that's what our school is. All right, so anyway, but a civil war does break out, so we're going to see war communism. This will give way to the NEP, which we'll talk about in a week or so, and then Lenin's death. So one of the kind of last things you need to make sure you understand is that when World War I ends, right, when World War I does end in November, in the fall of 1918, because it ends in various times in various places. The last part of it ends in November of 1918. So when World War I ends, not all American, French, and British soldiers go home. Some of those soldiers are going to kind of cycle into Russia and continue the fight. So the United States, the British, right, our allies, the French, we will send forces into Russia to support the whites, right? So versus Lenin's Reds, right? And this is a very nasty and bloody war. Almost as many people die in the Russian Civil War who die in World War I, right? So 9 million killed, in this Civil War. Really kind of horrific event, right? Really, really horrific event. All right, so. But it's during this time that we see the capital is moved from Petrograd, or former St. Petersburg, to Moscow, which is going to get renamed as Leningrad following the death of Lenin. Right, so the Kremlin then becomes synonymous with the Soviet Union. Right, we're going to see the beginnings of the Comintern, or the attempts to spread the socialist revolution around the world. And of course, once the Civil War is done, that'll put an end to the war communism, and then we're going to see the implementation of the NEP, the new economic policy. And the NEP will be in place from about 22 until you kind of see Stalin transition away from it, by 1928 or so. Is when we're going to see the transition away from that. But we'll talk about the NEP briefly when we talk about kind of the economics of the 20s during that time frame. So we'll get into a little bit more depth with that. Right, but the NEP is, right, the kind of idea behind the NEP is following the war communism associated with the Civil War period, to put Russia kind of back on its feet again economically. It had been at war for a better part of 8 years. And and much of its economy was destroyed. So, so it's kind of an attempt to deal with that. And of course, we know that Stalin's going to be the successor. One last little thing, kind of, because I did forget to mention this when talking about the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk, is following the kind of the end of World War I, Ukraine will declare independence for kind of a brief amount of time while the Civil War is going on. Once the Civil War is done, then Russia's, the Soviet Union is then going to kind of reclaim that. And I mention this because when we kind of get into, next week and kind of looking at the Soviet Union's economics, Stalin will be known for what's known as the Holodomor, which is a forced starvation event. About over 3 million Ukrainians are going to starve to death because Stalin allowed them to starve to death, right? And refused help, right? And actually exported food out of the Ukraine. And historians often will say that Stalin did that in retaliation for the Ukrainians declaring their independence during this moment in history. That kind of brief moment when Russia was down, right, during the Civil War. All right, but anyway, Stalin will be the successor, which we'll talk about that next week. All right, so let's just wrap this up. And I think I mentioned this in the last video already. So, right, so where Russia is one of these major land empires that kind of goes through this transition, during this first couple decades. All right, so that is all for today. So, Sapriati.